So welcome back, everyone. I am Eleni, and today we're gonna start our second lecture of the Winter Challenge 2024. I have a special guest with me, Arian. He's gonna tell you a bit about what he's doing, but I'm really glad to have him here. And Arian, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Arian. I'm very happy to be here today with you. I've heard a bit about your business cases and this and that. I wish you the best of luck with that as well. And hopefully today you'll enjoy the session. Now, today's talk is titled Everyday Economics When the Theory Actually Applies. And to expand on that a little bit, I've studied economics as well. And I obviously use it in my work on a day-to-day basis as well. But while you study economics and this and that, and you go through it, much of it seems like theoretical stuff that we'd never actually use on a day-to-day basis. Much of it is just like, you know it because you have to, and you think like an economist, which is fine. But we hardly ever come across actual day-to-day applications that you're like, oh, right, this is being used, right? And much of it can be boring and practical. I'm sure you get it. So when we were planning this talk, I immediately thought it would be great if I could get away from the theory a little and then focus on key points where economics has some sort of an interesting real life application that normally goes unseen by most people. So in this talk, I'll cover some unrelated economics concepts. We'll go anything from sort of sunk costs and price discrimination all the way to choices and this and that. And well, a bit about me, I'll explain before we get to the actual lecture. We'll figure out how to change the slides on this thing. There we go. Yeah, is the screen clear for everyone? Because I see about 100 things on my screen. Okay, perfect. Okay. Now, a little bit about me. Well, I'm Arian. I'm currently living in the Netherlands. I started my career writing algorithms for virtual self-driving cars. And this was still in Iran, where I'm originally from. I then moved to Cyprus, where I got involved in fintech. My first startup was developing automated trading systems that utilize proven strategies to make trades and investment decisions. I later got involved in a food tech startup, which gave you recipes based on ingredients you had in your reach, and had an AI that you could scan food that you see at restaurants and this and that, and then it analyzes it, runs it against our database, and gives you a recipe to make something like that at home. And that was actually my first involvement with junior achievement. Eleni has been involved to some extent with junior achievement as well. And then I also ended up as the national coordinator of junior achievement alumni for Cyprus. And that's how we got to know each other as well. Now, after switching careers a few times, I realized that my sort of passion and what I really like to focus on is entrepreneurship at the core. So creating solutions and supporting the creation of solutions. No particular industry or type of business or type of work. And just at the very, very core, creating new innovative solutions. That's what I really, really like doing. So now I'm working on a venture studio called Evernomic. We have a focus on media and software-based startups, and now manage almost a dozen different startups. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what a venture studio does, it's like a production studio, but instead of production, you do ventures and startups, right? So we develop framework systems, knowledge bases, and sort of practical step-by-step practices that we know work and have been proven, which we then apply to found and support various startups in relevant niches as efficiently as possible. And at the moment, as I said, the focus is on media and software, and sort of we stay within our niches because that's where we have the most strength, and we try to apply the same sort of assets that we've got for one idea or one project to others as well to make it as efficient as possible. Now, I don't want to make this talk about me, so if you have any questions about who I am or what I do, feel free to reach out privately. Otherwise, we can get started with the actual talk. Now, the concepts will get progressively more complex as we go, and we're going to start very, very basic. We'll start with the most sort of basic economics concept that I hope all of you already know about, which is, again, if the slide changes, it'd be great. There we go. Nope, those, there we go. Opportunity cost. Now, the definition goes without saying. It's essentially the loss of other alternatives when one alternative is chosen, right? Now, however, I thought I'd give you an example of how we use opportunity cost in our decision-making at Evernomic. We manage several startups, all of which is funded by us. So naturally, budgeting is a crucial part of our decision-making. It's important for us to know just because we can afford something, it doesn't mean we should do it. And we look deep into each decision's opportunity cost, and that naturally amplifies when you've got so many ways to spend it, right? Because at the end of the day, it's sort of the benefits of the alternatives that you got. And for each startup, there's about 100 ways to spend it. And we've got multiple startups that we're managing as well, funded through the same sort of pool. So to give you an example, we were looking at promotional strategies for one of our startups, and we looked at a lot of options, much of which were sort of one-time expenses like ads or what have you. And we realized that the opportunity cost of that expense is so high given how many ways we can spend it. And we're looking to promote an ad network, by the way. Now, when it comes to an ad network, you've got two sides, right? You've got the creators and you need the advertisers, and you have to somehow bring these guys together. Advertisers is considerably simpler because you don't need that many of them. One advertiser can be promoted through 100 creators and it'd be fine. The main challenge is reaching the creators, right? Now, we look at the big ad networks that are already running. Well, Google comes to mind, Meta comes to mind with Facebook, Instagram, etc., even TikTok. Now, they already had the creators through their own free platform. So Google starts as a free search engine, and everyone's already there. Everyone's using it, and a lot of people are going to start creating content on the internet, the website, the blogs back then. Anyway, now a bit less, but then they ended up acquiring YouTube as well, which is like free videos, and people are there creating. So they already had access to the creators. Meta, same thing. They've got Instagram, they've got Facebook. People create, so they've got that side. Now all they had to do was bring the advertisers and started working. For us, it's the same sort of situation, but we don't have the creators like Facebook or Google did, right? So we had to think of a way to reach these creators that we wanted to reach. One way to do it, probably the first way that comes to mind for most people as well, is that you spend a bunch on Instagram ads, or you spend a bunch on YouTube ads, and whoever's watching it, hopefully if they're a creator, they're going to sign up, right? Which is fine, but then there's an issue with this. You have to keep spending money for it to start giving some sort of return, right? If you're spending money on ads, as soon as you stop investing, then you're not going to get any return out of it, right? So, and obviously there's a churn rate as well, so the number of users that stop using your product. And if your product doesn't sort of grow without any effort, then you're constantly fighting a decline. And we realized that. So instead of spending money on ads, instead of doing any of those promotional strategies, we decided to acquire an authority newsletter directory, which is a website where you sort of find newsletters. We have a listing. We've got about 1,000 listings on the website now of different newsletters on different niches. How does this benefit us, and why is it different? It comes down to the opportunity cost. One way it's different is that firstly, it's a one-time expenditure. So we can sort of keep the budget for future expenditure on anything else that we want to sort of spend on. Also, another value is that it sort of keeps the value within the business. At least the website is worth something at any given point. Now, when someone starts a newsletter, the first thing they do to promote it, they submit it to directories, right? And if you Google how do I promote my newsletter, one of the first solutions that pops up is directories. And ours is one of the sort of authority ones. It's been running from 2019. Before we started running it, we acquired it naturally. So every time someone starts a newsletter, we get their email because they send us a submission, right? So now that the ad network is launching, we've got a creator network of over 5 million newsletter subscribers, and that sort of gives us the edge that we wanted to have. Now, the beauty of it is that it also helps us promote some media projects that we've got that have anything to do with newsletters, because we can list them on the homepage, and it drives sort of free traffic. So we looked at the opportunity cost of the X amount that we're going to spend. We realized that this way it benefits multiple projects at the same time, and it's a one-time spending that's going to keep giving, right? So that's just a very basic example of how we look at opportunity costs in a real business case. Now, again, it goes to the wrong slide. There we go. Okay, cool. Now, the next concept I wanted to cover is sunk costs. This one is also very, very simple. Sunk costs are sort of costs that are spent already and they can't be recovered anymore. It's quite a simple concept to wrap your head around, so this one will be quick. Now, the trick is sort of to not let those past costs trick us into making not so great decisions. Just because you spent money or time or something doesn't mean you should keep throwing more resources at it if it's not working out, right? And the benefits of understanding sunk costs to your core is that it helps you make decisions based on what's ahead, not what's already gone. And it stops us from spending more time, money, or effort because we've already spent some, right? And it teaches us to recognize when it's time to cut our losses and move on to better opportunities. Now, this one's obviously simple to wrap your head around, but there's one more important note that you really need to understand, is that sunk cost doesn't necessarily apply strictly monetarily. It also applies with your time and effort. So that's something you need to keep in mind, even outside of business, obviously. And if you spend money or time or effort on anything, and you feel that it's just sort of a losing game, then you have to let it go and move on. And it's a massive asset in decision making. Once again, if you apply it to our business, we've had to shut down 2 projects so far that we spent a lot of time on, spent months of work and effort. But we shut it down, and now we have almost a dozen other startups running in a good state. It was just a necessary loss to progress. And this one's quite simple, so I'll pass it quickly. Now we move on to a slightly more sort of complex economics concept. I'm not sure how many are already familiar with price discrimination, but essentially it's when a seller sells the same product to different buyers at different prices, or similar goods that are charged at different prices, when it's not just due to the cost difference of the product. So for whatever reason, they give offerings that are different from one another, even though it costs them the same to make it. Now, it happens often. We've seen a lot of different examples of it on a day-to-day basis. It might go unseen, but there's 3 types of price discrimination. It's first-degree price discrimination, which is a theoretical ideal where the companies know exactly how to differentiate between different customer groups and give them the price at which they're sort of happiest with. But this is obviously theoretical and it's very idealistic. It doesn't really happen. But then we've got second-degree price discrimination, which is when firms can't really distinguish between different types of customers, which is what normally happens in the real world. But they design their products and pricings in such a way where consumers choose to reveal themselves based on their choices. So an example of this that we see on a day-to-day basis is business class tickets and how airlines price it. There's people that are willing to pay higher amounts, and obviously airlines want that, but there's also people that are not willing to pay that higher amount. So they have to make an offering where the sort of richer, let's say, customer group goes to the business class, and then the ones that need more affordable options go to economy. Now, there's a whole sort of math that goes into that, is that your offering has to be in such a way where obviously it's under, so business class, the price has to be under the sort of willingness to pay for the richer customer group, let's say. And then the economy also has to be lower than the willingness to pay, the maximum willingness to pay by the more affordable customer group. But there's one more condition, is that the pricing doesn't have to be in such a way where even the richer customer group, the ones that are supposed to go to business class, are like, you know what, this is not worth it. I'd much rather go to economy. And there's a whole math that goes into that, this and that, but we won't get into that on this particular talk. And then there's third-degree price discrimination as well, where normally an indicator is used to differentiate between customer groups. So in this case, you can distinguish between them, but you need to have some sort of indication. For example, like a student card is one way to do it. If you bring a student card to the people, they know that, okay, cool, this is a student, I can identify it, and I'll give them a different pricing. And someone that doesn't bring it will get a different pricing as well. And you can't really, so if it's like a senior citizen pass, for example, you can't take advantage of your grandmother's pass to get a discount, right? Because grandmother actually has to be there. Therefore, it's a lot easier to distinguish between the two, and it's another way where people discriminate in terms of prices. And yeah, to name a few examples, we'll get more into it in terms of where we actually see price discrimination, a few interesting examples as well. But we've seen it very often as airlines, telecom. We've got different packages for phones and SIM card subscriptions. You've got quantity discounts. Electricity bills actually come with price discrimination as well, train tickets, etc., etc. Now, we'll get to one example that I find particularly interesting. So in May 1990, IBM announced the introduction of the laser printer E, which is a lower cost alternative to its at the time popular laser printer. And the E looked very much like the original model of the laser printer, except that the E model printed paper at 5 pages per minute, as opposed to the 10 pages per minute of the normal laser printer. Now, the retail price for the E model was $1,400, whereas the original model was $2,300. So a considerable price gap between the two, but they looked very similar and they functioned almost exactly the same way. Now, how they made this happen and how they launched the Model E was that IBM added chips to their Model E to make the machine pause and then print more slowly. So they deliberately took a sort of costly action to damage their own product to sell it at a lower price. They initially had one version, but then they started to sell a damaged version at a lower price, and that's the second-degree price discrimination. So they tried to offer two different packages, one for the people that would prefer going with a more affordable option, and that they wouldn't have otherwise purchased the printer if the only option available to them was the $2,300 one. And this is interesting because you've got the product that's perfectly functional, it's printing 10 pages a minute. You don't think in your mind that a company like IBM would go on and damage their own system so that it prints slower just so you can, offer a cheaper pricing as well. But in this case, if you look at it, if you've got people that are willing to pay the 2,300, that's fine, but the number is probably much smaller. All the students, all the sort of normal households that they don't use it for professional purposes, etc., at the time might have not found it worth it to purchase the more expensive model. So now they have two different packages as opposed to one, and then it sort of price discriminates from there. Now, another example of price discrimination is the telecommunications industry and mobile telephones in general. Now, pricing these sort of mobile phone subscriptions should be easy, right? You just set a price per minute, sort of a test message or per megabyte or however you do it. But then somehow, even though it seems simple in theory, the amount of options and packages and combinations telecom companies provide and are offering is just overwhelming, right? Now, in the Netherlands where I live, there's three main large providers in terms of this industry. There's KPN, Vodafone, and T-Mobile, and then there's a host of other networks that use these three to offer their packages. Now, again, you'd think that their prices would be similar, but KPN has 11 different offerings. Vodafone has 21 different offerings, and T-Mobile has 114 different offerings. Now, why do firms do this? One explanation is price discrimination, right? Because obviously you can offer different packages to different people that are willing to pay different prices. But another explanation actually of this that doesn't tie into price discrimination is differentiation. Their products are pretty homogenous, so it's a SIM card. You want to make a call at the end of the day. There's not much that you can differentiate on. But when you offer so many different packages, it makes it a bit harder for consumers to start comparing the prices. Because then you're like, okay, cool. There's so many details, not a direct comparison. It's like one has got unlimited this, one doesn't have, and it's just a complicated sort of comparison to make. And then like this, the firms avoid falling prey to the Bertrand paradox, essentially just competing on prices alone, and then it's going to be it would be a messy sort of perfect competition style, which is also theoretical, but in this way they avoid and they differentiate as best as they possibly can. Now, there we go. Congestion pricing is another concept that I wanted to cover today, and just a question for the audience. I mean, if we can raise hands or somehow, how many of you live in a big city where there's a lot of traffic with cars? I don't even know if I can see you can put it in the chat. Eleni, can we put it in the chat or no?
They can.
Oh, I can see.
They can also raise hands or.
I see the notifications.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, quite a few. Because here where we live, right, there's bikes strictly. There's hardly any cars. So the concept I'm covering today is something I should learn from myself. We don't have cars here, so it's a bit of a different case. But at least some of you, I can tell. Yeah, there we go. Raising hands, quite a few. So a lot of people live in a big city. Now, congestion pricing. Imagine you're in a city where the traffic is a nightmare, right? Especially during rush hour, and there's a lot of people going to work, coming back from work, and it's just a terrible mess in total. Now, to tackle this, some cities have come up with sort of a smart idea called congestion pricing. The cities charge drivers a little extra to use the busiest roads at the busiest times. And this makes some people think, okay, maybe I'll just travel at a different time, or I'll take a different route. Now, here's why this is clever, not just beyond making money for the government and also lowering traffic. So obviously, the first benefit of it, first and foremost, is that you have less traffic. And when people drive during those peak times, roads get less crowded, and then traffic flows better when they go to drive at other locations or at different hours. You also have cleaner air, because with fewer cars on the road, there's less pollution. And this is great for obviously our health and the health of the planet as well, and the environment that's sort of living there. And then that gets into the externalities of driving, and that minimizes it to a great extent. And indirectly, it also contributes to better public services, because naturally the money that they're charging the drivers goes to the government's budget, which can later be spent on improving public transport, for example, or just the sort of infrastructure of the city in general. And it's a win-win for everyone, right? So it's a simple sort of idea where you're thinking to yourself, all right, cool, there's a lot of cars. How do I solve this? Right. And then the first solution that comes to mind is, all right, cool, let's charge them something during the busiest hours of the busiest times. And then the benefits that you reap from it is considerably higher. So it's quite an interesting concept to see how a simple sort of tax on driving at a time where you're not supposed to drive benefits the city. Now, yeah, it's sort of thinking outside the box. And then this is a daily use case of economics, at least for those of you living in more crowded cities and with a lot of cars, then it's a daily use case of economics, which can be interesting. Now, there we go. Fast food locations. This is the more interesting point for the foodies here, including myself. And have you ever sort of noticed when you go to a shopping mall or you go to anywhere that all the fast food restaurants, even if there is no shopping mall, the fast food restaurants are normally located in the same area, right? McDonald's, KFC, everything, you put them next to each other. Even Burger King and McDonald's are often facing each other, right? Which is strange. And if you sort of think about it for a second, it's like, all right, cool. For the longest time in business, we've been taught to sort of differentiate from the competitors, right? So why do you go and locate exactly where your competitors are? It seems like a smarter decision to not do that and go serve a market that doesn't have fast food restaurants, but yet we see it in almost every single city. They put all the fast food restaurants in the exact same location. Now, why does this happen? Well, there's quite a few reasons for it actually, but let's say you and your friends are going out and you can't decide where to eat, right? One of you wants a burger, another one wants tacos, one wants chicken nuggets, one wants pizza, whatever. And when all these fast food spots come close together, it makes it easier for everyone to come pick up what they want without having to go too far. And essentially, whatever your preference may be, it ties you down to one location, regardless of what you want. You go to that one location and you figure it out from there. And there's a sort of a breakdown of why it works. You've got more choices and therefore more customers. So you being close to your competitors actually attracts more customers for you, because even if someone doesn't want your food, there's an alternative that they do want to cross, but their friend, for example, might come shop from you, right? So it's sort of like a food court effect, and the more people come to the area because they know that they can find whatever they're in the mood for. And you also save on costs as one of these businesses, because these restaurants also save money on advertising. First, you don't really have to advertise, because if someone knows where KFC is, they're probably going to come and see McDonald's as well. And they also share some of the sort of infrastructure costs, right? Like parking, lighting, etc. It's cheaper and more efficient for them. And lastly, they learn from each other as well. It's just continuous learning from competitors, because you're close to your competition and always sort of keeps you on your toes, and you're always trying to improve and win over the customers, and you compete directly. Otherwise, you might not see a nice sort of campaign that one restaurant runs, or if there's some sort of deal that they're offering and everyone's going to queue up there instead. And this way you can't really innovate as rapidly. And this is, again, another interesting example of sort of a daily phenomenon that goes unseen, including myself. Most of us, I assume, we go to a shopping mall, we see these, we don't really ask these questions, regardless of how much economics we study, right? But then this is a sort of a concept that can help you wrap your hair around the locationing of fast food restaurants. Now we move on to the paradox of choice. Now imagine you're standing in a huge wall of sort of cereal, let's say, in the grocery store, right? There's hundreds of options, from chocolate puffs to fruity flakes or whatever, the muesli or whatever you like. And you look at all these options, and you'd think that having all these choices would make you happy, but it turns out that too many options can actually affect us in the opposite way, and can make us feel stressed and less satisfied with whatever we choose. And this also ties in again sort of with the opportunity cost, right? And you don't really think about this on a day-to-day basis, that having options can actually make me less happy. But research has shown actually that this is the case. And regardless of what you choose, there was so many options that you left behind that you're always in your mind going to be a bit thinking about, like, oh, I still feel like it would have been better if I made another choice, right? So this is called the paradox of choice. Obviously, having choices and having options is a good thing. and makes us happy in a way. But when you have too many and they're overwhelming, then the opportunity cost starts to add up, and then at that point it becomes a problem. Now, when we have just a few options, it's easier to decide, and we're more confident in our choice as well. But when they're endless, we worry about missing out on something better, which can make us unhappy with our final decision, even if it's a good one. Right. So this is the paradox of choice. Now, how can fancy restaurants use this within their menus and sort of utilize the paradox of choice for two different purposes? The two different purposes that they do normally use it for is, number one, increasing the satisfaction of each dish, and number two, it's increasing satisfaction of smaller portions. So if you go to a really fancy restaurant, you'll realize a few things. Either there's a lot of different options and you're overwhelmed entirely and you don't know what to choose at all, which is again the paradox of choice, or you'll realize that the menu doesn't offer that many options at all. Right. So if it doesn't offer that many options at all, this is a strategy actually that they do utilize to increase the satisfaction of each dish. It's not like you go to a fancy restaurant and you think, oh, they really can't offer more than one dish. They can, they don't on purpose because they want you to see that one option or two options and three options that they've got, the very few that they've got. And you don't end up thinking about anything else. If they're serving you steaks, you're never going to start thinking about some pasta that you could have had that you missed out on, or some fish that would have been really good. You just focus on the steak, you have it, and it increases your satisfaction of that one particular dish. Now, we also realize that fancy restaurants often have much smaller portions, and it's portions that normally don't get you full. But if you start paying attention to this, well, I hope so after this talk, when you go to fancy restaurants with smaller portions, normally their menus have a lot of options, and they do that because you go through all the options and just looking at them, you get full to some extent, and you think of so many different foods, and you sort of imagine eating all these different foods and which one was better and this and that. And in this process of decision making, you end up getting some level of satisfaction already. So when the food comes, you're half full anyway. You're not as hungry as you used to be. You're not craving anything specific because you saw so many different things. So that smaller portion still satisfies you. And that also helps the fancier restaurants lower their costs as well, because it takes them less sort of ingredients to make each dish. Now, we say a lot of other reasons fall into why they give smaller portions as well. This is not the only reason. One of them, for example, being that when you overeat, then you end up feeling bad after, and you sort of associate that feeling of sort of feeling sick and feeling too full with the restaurants. Every time you go to McDonald's, you probably feel sick after, right? And in your mind is just associated with that. Obviously, fancier restaurants, they try to avoid that. That's why some of the portions are slightly smaller. But regardless, one of the reasons they do act the way they do is through the paradox of choice. And this was another concept that I wanted to cover in today's talk. Now we're going to move on to some questions. Thank you for your attention. I hope you found it relatively interesting. Sort of going away from the theory of economics and the textbook sort of principles that we have to learn, all of us, and that's important as well, of course. But I thought to give it a twist for today, I go through more real life examples. I hope you found it interesting. Now, if we can move on to sort of like a questions section, is that possible, Lenny?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Arian, first of all. I think it was a very interesting one, and it's also a twist to the actual, like when you actually get a textbook and you start reading about economic concepts. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Let's give them maybe some time to write their questions in the chat.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we will have the recording available and post it on YouTube. So once we share it with everyone, maybe they send us some questions in the group chats, and I will make sure they're forwarded to Arian and have some answer by some time.
Absolutely. And also you can share my email, and if anyone wants to reach out or send any questions or anything like that, I'd be happy to. Can I put it in the chat? I don't know how this works. I'm not very good at Zoom.
Yeah, you can just type it in the chat.
Do I have to choose meeting group chat? Yeah.
Yes. And I think the presentation was actually, like, the whole concept of it pretty applicable to how the economics round is tested in this competition, because we tend to go for more real life examples and how theory actually applies, as this lecture was also named. So I think it might be very helpful for some of the attendants here today in the preparation.
Yeah. No, I thought it'd be interesting as well. I mean, it's a few concepts that I think of as well on a day-to-day basis. I sort of try to take the points that I wanted to cover today from things that I think about on a day-to-day basis as well. Well, not on a day-to-day basis, but occasionally anyway. And when I feel like I can apply economics and sort of feel good about knowing economics. That was sort of my goal for today, and just to give them a different sort of perspective of the stuff that they're learning theoretically.
And maybe a question from me. How did you actually, okay, so you studied economics, and then how did you start connecting the dots between the real life examples and the things that you read in the textbooks during your courses?
Well, listen, the most important part and the goal of any economics degree is that you think like an economist, right? You're never going to understand or learn the sort of formulas and this and that off by heart. It just doesn't happen. And I can almost guarantee it that I couldn't pass the most basic economics exam without revision. There's just absolutely no chance. You don't remember this, no one does. And but the goal of it is to make you think like an economist and connect the dots like an economist. And if you sort of perfect that, then you do see the world at a different angle than if you hadn't studied economics. And about the question in the group, by the way, I can definitely add anyone on LinkedIn. You can just send a request to this name, and it's fine. But yeah, I started looking, and a lot of them actually came about as like random times. So about the fast food locations, it was before I studied economics. I was searching about different degrees and like how to find it interesting. And I remember it's a YouTube video that was talking about, yeah, it's a cool degree because you know, like if you're walking through the fast food places, you know why they're all in one sort of area. And he didn't explain why. I just sort of had it in the back of my head. And then 2 years after that, I was like, let me Google. I remember him saying it. I didn't understand. So I Googled and I sort of learned that aspect of it. And obviously, a lot of them come from books and examples that you see in books. But I tend to remember these real life examples more than I remember the theory itself. So it was a microeconomics course that we were doing about price discrimination, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't remember anything from the course except for the two examples I used today with the telecommunication providers and the IBM one. And that's about all I remember from the course, nothing else. So I guess for me, it's I'm more example oriented. But yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are.
Yeah, definitely.
I see no questions, but if some people are interested in LinkedIn,
Yeah.
Arian shared his LinkedIn. There is also an IEO LinkedIn community. So like
I
all
added
up,
Lucas.
or I think we also have you tagged there, Arian. So
No. Let me see. I'm sharing my screen, so I can't really go to another tab, but
I can
let me share.
Give me a second.
Yeah, perfect.
So I guess this was pretty much it. I see. How does inflation affect you? There is a question.
Well, affect me in business specifically or in day-to-day life? Because on a day-to-day life, I feel like it's quite similar for everyone how it affects you. Essentially, costs are increased, obviously. But if we're talking on a personal level, then naturally it affects me the same way it affects everyone else. Things are more expensive, and obviously with that, if you're at on like a business standpoint, you're looking at it, then you sort of have to match your prices with inflation as well. And the main sort of way that, to be honest, inflation affects my day-to-day life is that you have to try to keep up with industry prices as much as you can, because then you end up undercharging or overcharging or this and that. Obviously, you hardly overcharge in this economy, but you have to keep up with sort of the standards of every industry. And you also have to keep in mind that a lot of the spending that people do, regardless of what it's on, it comes out the same pocket. So if one industry is significantly going through, or rather, it's going through significant inflation, then you need to realize that their budget has probably decreased by a lot. So even if you're in another industry, regardless, you might have to even lower your prices because then your customers can't afford it at all. It's a very general question. Obviously, it depends on which aspect you're sort of pinpointing most, but I would say briefly, that's what it is. Yeah, perfect. You sent my LinkedIn as well.
So the links are in the chat. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Arian, for giving the lecture and sharing the examples with us. Just a reminder for everyone that the business case submission deadline is tomorrow. at 23:59 UTC. So make sure you guys are prepared for that and maybe upload them a bit earlier just in case any technical issues arise. And we keep in touch in the group chats and via email for the next steps. I'm wishing everyone
Good
a
luck
great
with the
weekend. Yeah.
great weekend and good luck with the business cases, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the presentation. It was perfect. So goodbye.
No, thank you. Thank you. Take
Just
care.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. Glad you liked it. Take care.
Yeah.
I think we connected on LinkedIn, by the way, so I'll have a chat with you.